Welcome, everybody, to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, Pete Wright. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Nikki Kinzer.
Hi.
I'm really, really, really excited about this topic.
You are?
Yeah. I am.
Why?
Can you believe it? Because it's about all I can think about.
Oh, kind
Right?
of obsessed with the whole
Do you get
topic
it?
thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I do get it. Yeah.
Do you know, this is we're going to be talking about hyperfocus today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one that people don't understand about ADHD, that many people don't understand.
Yes. And actually, some people with ADHD, if they were first diagnosed or newly diagnosed, they may not really understand what this is either. So
Totally.
Hopefully we're going to provide a little bit of education out there.
Right. So, so the assumption is you have ADHD, you're struggling with ADHD. People discover that you are struggling with ADHD. Their assumption is, oh my gosh, I knew some ADHD kids when I was in elementary school. I'll bet he can't sit still in his chair and, likes to give people wedgies or something.
Right.
But
they
it's
just
like,
can't
it's
pay
that,
attention.
Yeah, it's that sense that you can't sit still, you can't pay attention, you can't, look somebody in the eyes. Like that's real trouble for that person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and I've also been told by parents before, or just adults as well, it doesn't have to just be children, but they'll say, oh, he doesn't have ADHD because he can sit there and play video games all day long.
Oh, yes. How many times have I heard that? Too many.
Right. And I'm thinking, well, actually, that might actually be a real symptom there of ADHD. I'm not saying it is, but it could be. I mean, just because you can actually focus on something all day long doesn't mean that you don't have it either, right? It's definitely a misconception in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this, the fact that ADHD is a spectrum disorder. Mm-hmm. It is a very complicated bucket of behaviors.
That's right.
And ADHD does absolutely not look like all things to all people.
That's right. Everybody has their own story is what I tend to,
nice.
tell people. Yeah, everybody has their own story. So yes, exactly. So what is hyperfocus? I probably need to talk a little bit about that and give a little bit of education around that. And then I have a couple of strategies to at least maybe help you be more aware of hyperfocusing and kind of what to do about it. So does that sound good?
I can't wait. Let's do it.
All right. Well, first of all, hyperfocus is obviously if you put something in front of a person with ADHD, and it's something that they are really interested in, like video games, something you really enjoy, something that really stimulates them, they can pay attention. They will absolutely pay attention. In fact, they probably can pay better attention than somebody that doesn't have ADHD if it's something that they really love and are really passionate about. What happens is the con to hyperfocusing is that the world can actually stop around them. I mean, time literally can just be slipped away, which is good and bad. It's great if you found something that you're really passionate about, but it can be really bad if it starts to affect your productivity at your job, at school, relationships at home, because you can't stop doing something, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just a little a caveat to your con. Not only does time slip away, but the real danger if you're struggling with hyperfocus is that you don't always get to choose what you're going to hyperfocus on.
That's right. Yeah, you may not even be consciously aware of it, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happening in your brain, I'm going to sound a little clinical here, so you'll have to forgive me, but like being distracted, right? So being, obviously ADHD is an attention deficit, but it's sort of on the flip side of that is having too much attention. So hyperfocus happens because of the low levels of dopamine. I can never say that right. Dopamine.
I think it's dopamine. I think is actually how the traditional pronunciation. I'm sure that's right.
Pulling my leg now. Now, let me see if I get this word right. The neurotransmitter that is active in the brain's frontal lobe. So the deficiency is what makes it hard to shift gears or transition from one activity to the other. So it's that low level of dopamine that's making that difficult. So there really is a scientific reason of why this happens. I mean, I think that some people think, oh, they're just obsessed with it or they can control it. There's all these myths around it, but there is a chemical reaction that's happening or lack of that's happening that's making this happen to folks. So All right. So what do you do, right?
Right.
What can you do to curb this? I think the first thing is awareness. Just like any pieces of ADHD, it's really important to understand how this affects you. And so, what are the things that will pull you in? What I try to identify those things and call them out. Like, okay, I know that the video games is going to be a distraction for me. So that at some point I have to figure out how I'm going to, make that work or not work. And so most of my clients have been able to pinpoint what that is. I use the video games as an example because it's so common. And just to give you an idea or an example, I had a college student who actually had his roommate hide the game console while he was studying for finals. And so because he knew that was going to be a huge distraction, he knew that he needed to study. And so for him, that was the best thing for him to do, is actually take what he was hyper-focusing completely away from his environment altogether.
Yeah. I can totally see that, because that dopamine, it's a reward response, right? I mean, you get the same, and this happens to me too. Like you increase dopamine levels by giving yourself that shot of whatever it is that you really, really love, right? Like, and that could be food, that could be sex, it could be video games. Like, those trigger dopamine response, and so it becomes like an addiction, right? That's the real challenge, and that's what I think another thing for me, at least, that drives that hyper focus. Just a little aside, when I was going through grad school, this was just the turn of digital music, right? And so I have, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CDs, and I started doing homework to CDs while I was ripping them to my own kind of iTunes library, right? Mm-hmm. And I became so hyper-focused on that it actually took over. Like, I got such joy out of that little bing that happened when it was finished ripping, that gave me a dopamine shot. Like, that was like such satisfaction that I all other stuff kind of fell away until I finished that process.
That's right.
It ends up becoming a huge cost, emotional cost, and productivity, and under pressure of going to school, a huge cost.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because you think about professionals, that are in the workforce, and there's other things that can definitely take your attention away. Facebook can be a big time sucker, right? Because you're all of a sudden you're on Facebook, and then an hour or two have gone by, and you have no idea, you didn't realize it. Internet, email.
Every like and every share is a dopamine response.
Absolutely. And so you get lost in it, for sure. And so I think, again, that awareness of bringing that to your attention and saying, okay, this is a distraction. This is something I like a little too much right now, and I need to do it later, or setting those limits. And that's really kind of what the next tip I have is really setting some boundaries around what it is that you're enjoying. And there are simple tools, and I think the most simple tool that people can use is that alarm system, whether that is on your phone or you have a timer or something to remind you, okay, it's time to stop. So you say you're going to give yourself an hour to do something, and you set that timer for an hour. I do suggest that you use a different tone than what you normally use, because that will actually wake up or get you away from what you're doing, because it's something different, if that makes sense.
Like a different than what? Like the tone you wake up to?
Yeah, or the tone that reminds you that you have to go pick up your kids,
right.
The reminder of, something's in the oven. Like, you may, for this particular subject, when we're talking about hyper-focusing, I would definitely suggest that you use a different tone on your alarm, just to get your attention, because it's really easy to ignore it.
Sure. That makes sense.
You may even want to take it a step further and put the alarm like in another room, or not. Well, you have to still listen to it, maybe on the other side of the room. So you have to actually get up to turn it off.
Yeah.
I know it seems kind of, that seems silly that I would have to do that, but you have to transition yourself out of whatever it is you're doing. And so pulling yourself or standing up, if you're sitting, standing up, walking, and getting the alarm, is that reminder, okay, I have to stop. It's time to stop. I have to move on and do something else. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Okay, so the third piece of this puzzle that we want to try to solve is the accountability aspect, and how important the accountability can be when you're trying to take yourself away from whatever it is you're focusing on. And this could definitely be somebody you live with, like a partner, your roommate, your spouse, whatever, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You could also call a friend and say, hey, this is an issue. Can you call me or text me? Just to kind of remind yourself that, okay, it's time to stop. So again, it's just telling somebody else about the issue so you're not in it alone, and being upfront about it. This is a real issue, and kind of set up that agreement that it's not supposed to be a nagging situation. We don't want anybody to feel annoyed, but it's definitely to help the person out. So, you've got an alarm set, you've got somebody checking in on you. Those are two really, positive things that can get you to stop doing what it is that you're doing. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Okay. I think that whole idea, the idea of assigning someone else, and we've talked about this before, this whole idea that accountability is a thing that you shouldn't need forever.
Right.
There is something to this idea, however, that some things you may need accountability for longer than others.
Right.
And because this is so ingrained in like the chemistry of how you work, that this is one of the things where you may need to rely on external sources longer than you may think.
Absolutely, especially if you're not trusting yourself that you can do it on your own. And that's going to definitely happen at the beginning, because you really, going back to habits, you really are forming a new habit for yourself. So instead of, okay, I'm going to play video games and I'm not going to care, or it's just going to, this is the way I am, you're actually saying, wait, nope, okay, I'm going to do something different. I am actually going to set some boundaries around that. And yes, it definitely is going to take some time and some accountability and some practice. And being kind to yourself too. If you go over a little bit, you're practicing the new habit, right?
Exactly.
And then I definitely think that the last thing I want to touch on is just using this as a reward. So if we've talked about this before, and I've had mixed reviews actually with people saying to do something fun first before they do something boring. I actually had a client tell me that it didn't work for them because they got stuck in the hyper-focusing. And so isn't that interesting that they ended up doing something, fun first, and then they ended up continuing that before they actually went to the boring task. And so again, I think that that's where you have to really put the boundaries around what it is that you're doing. So if you're using this as a reward for either doing something that you don't want to do, or doing this first before you have to go and tackle a boring task, we have to put those boundaries around it.
Yeah, I think there's a caveat to that. Like just saying, and this may be something to revisit about the, do something fun first. This idea that you would say, I'm going to do something fun and choose something that you will hyper focus on, that is ultimately a dopamine reward activity. Like, for example, if you were to tell me, Pete, go do something fun, and then tell me to go boot up my Xbox, that would be a horrible choice, because that's a dopamine trigger for me. Like, I get satisfaction out of playing video games, and I would hyper-focus on that. But to do something that I know isn't that kind of a trigger activity, that I can just get started. I need to get started. And it may be as simple as just calling somebody and having a 10-minute conversation, with a social conversation, just to get my brain kind of triggered, or go to a coffee shop and sit and listen to the white noise of conversations around me for a few minutes. Like, those are the kinds of things that get me started, but I wouldn't choose like, hey, Pete, I need you to go eat a dozen donuts. That's right. What you're telling me by saying I'm going to go, do something that is a hyper-focused really dopamine shot. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, that again, I think is why it's so important that we understand exactly how the ADHD affects you. Like we said at the beginning, everybody has their own story. And so my intention, especially for these kinds of podcasts, are, try it and see what happens. And does it work for you? And if it doesn't, then, try something else. You can't give up on it. We don't want hyperfocus to be a bad thing.
Yeah. And would you talk just a little bit about that? Because I think that is a really important twist, and it's something you've talked about before, that hyperfocus, in fact, is not a bad thing once you learn how it works for you. In fact, it's your superhero power.
Absolutely. And especially if you find something you're really passionate about and you can turn that into a career or you can turn that into some kind of cause, then those are really positive things. And we want joy in our life. We want to be happy. We want to feel, like this is a great thing. I mean, I'm not putting it into words correctly, but you know what I'm trying to say. I mean, that joy is what we're trying to achieve. And so it can be a very positive thing. I think it's great to be passionate about something, and really like things. And video games aren't bad. It's just, you have to put boundaries around them. Checking Facebook is not, social media is not bad. You just have to put boundaries around them so they don't affect the other areas of your life.
Well, and you know what? There are careers in social media and in video gaming that might be perfect for you if that's what you focus on.
Absolutely.
That's, you could really excel in that area. But as with everything, as Nikki says, it's about awareness and learning what measure success takes on you. I think that's great. I think we've solved the world's problems.
You think?
do we have anything? Do we have anything else for the people?
Nope, that's it for today.
I love it. What a great topic. Folks, you need to tell us what you think about this and how Hyperfocus works for you. So you do that by heading over to any one of our various social platforms. You can head over to Facebook and join the conversation there, or Twitter, or even Google+. And just let us know, what is Hyperfocus for you? What do you hyperfocus on? How do you make yourself accountable for time outside of what you tend to get lost in? You can learn more about the show at the website, takecontrolorganizing.com, or on iTunes. You can subscribe for free. Make sure you don't miss a single episode of Nikki Kinzer's ADHD Brilliance. It's out there. You just have to reach out and grab it. That's all I have for today. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.